Hey guys, so I just finished 13 Reasons Why. I know it's been out for a while, but it took me so long to get through, and I have some thoughts. If you don't know, 13 Reasons Why discusses suicide, so if that sort of talk makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to click away. I will put a card here to a far more lighthearted video. Go watch that instead. Now, the big debate surrounding this show is it harmful? On the one hand, there are people who think that portraying suicide so graphically and having this story where the suicide note is basically a form of revenge is sort of promoting this sort of unhealthy behavior surrounding suicide. And the other side thinks that discussing suicide and having stories about suicide is important both to raise awareness for mental health issues and also as an anti-bullying thing. And I think both sides have some merit, and both sides, I think, have taken it a little too far. Firstly, there is a huge difference between the book and the show, and I will do my best to sort of explain both pieces of media because they are sort of two separate entities. Now, the main message of both stories seems to be treat people kindly because you don't know what they're going through. And I've always sort of hated that message. I think it's important to be kind regardless of what people are going through. Even if somebody has a perfect life and is perfectly content, you still should not be mean to them. I mean, come on. Now, the book is far more concrete and far more concise and focused, and I sort of appreciate that. The show, I felt, got a little muddled in its message and its storyline. I love me an unreliable narrator. I really do. But in this case, the show made a point of emphasizing that Hannah was not a reliable narrator. Whereas in the book, because Clay is viewing this through his perspective, he is the unreliable narrator, and we're sort of supposed to take Hannah at her word. And in the show, this sort of feeds into that idea of not knowing what somebody's going through. But in the book, it's more used for emotional impact. Because it's from the perspective of Clay, his emotions are what we're supposed to feel. Yes, Hannah's emotions are important in the story, but Clay's reaction to her stories is what's important in the book. In the show, you get to see everybody's reactions to these tapes, and in a way, I think that sort of detracts from the message. In the book, having Clay sort of detached from the other people keeps his distance as somebody who didn't do anything wrong. In the books, Hannah literally says, Clay, you did nothing wrong. And I think that separating Clay from the rest of the group was a good narrative choice, but I think it's far more realistic to have him confronting these people. And I think in the show, it's also important because we get to see the impact that Hannah's death had on everybody. Not just the people on the tapes, but her parents, the school, everybody. Although I didn't really like the addition of the lawsuit issue because that was just too complicated. It did not need to be there. There are a lot of things that really didn't need to be in the show, but that's not really what I'm here to talk about. I have dealt with suicides in the past. When I was in high school, there were multiple suicides, and it was terrible. But our school didn't really respond in the way that Hannah's school did. Rather than treat it as a bullying thing, they treated it as a mental health thing, and I think that that's important. I don't think that Hannah's school handled the suicide very well, but I think that's also sort of the point. Because in the end, there were far more than 13 reasons why Hannah committed suicide. And there's also only one, and that was Hannah. Her mental illness is what led her ultimately to suicide, and I don't think that the show or the book really emphasized that point at all. Reading the book, I felt so bad for Tony because he was thrust into this and he had nothing to do with it. And in the show, I didn't feel as badly for him because instead of just being this one night where he had to keep an eye on Clay, it was weeks. And he was sort of involved in every single little storyline, and That just made him far less sympathetic for me. Who I did feel bad for was Mr. Porter, both in the book and the show. Granted, he did not do the best job in helping Hannah, but in both the book and the show, they sort of missed the point that he tried. And honestly, Hannah was not trying. And pinning it all on Mr. Porter sort of ignores the fact that when you have a mental illness and you're struggling with this stuff, you have to do the work. It is hard work, but it is so important to do it. So in the end, whether 13 Reasons Why is more helpful or harmful really depends on the viewer. If the viewer has not dealt with mental illness in the past, then I feel like it's an okay story for them to view and to sort of get a vague idea of what's going on in people's heads when they struggle with mental illness. It is by no means perfect, though. And if the viewer does struggle with mental illness, I think that it is ultimately harmful because it's not a happy ending. It shows everything that you can do wrong, but it doesn't frame it in a context that says this is not how you deal with mental illness. I think that the disclaimers at the beginning of the episodes and the resources they point to are a start, and given the story, I think that's honestly the best they could do. What I would like to see, and what I think would be more helpful for people struggling with mental illness and those who aren't, is a story where somebody deals with suicidal thoughts, but they do the work and they get help and they get better. As corny and cliche as It Gets Better stories can be, I think they are ultimately so much more important than these dark, edgy stories. Because for somebody dealing with suicidal thoughts, to see or even hear talked about a story where suicidal thoughts ultimately lead to suicide is not helpful. It shows that one path, and it's so important for them to see the other path. To see that they can get help, and they can get better. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Let me know below what you thought of 13 Reasons Why, and I will see you next time. Bye.